Hello everyone, if you can hear me right now, I am about to begin. I'm just starting the stream a little bit early, so I'll quickly introduce myself. My name is Lauren. I'm a librarian here at San Antonio Public Library, and today I'm going to do a mass demonstration. So we will start in about 5 minutes. I'm just going to do a quick test of our stream. So if you will just hang tight, I will be here shortly, and it looks like we are live. So I'll go ahead and just quickly explain a little bit about the particular thing that we're doing. I am about to begin. I'm just starting the stream a little bit early, so I'll quickly introduce myself. My name is Lauren. I'm a librarian here at San Antonio Public Library, and today I'm going to do a mass demonstration. Okay, so sorry about that. A little bit of a technical difficulty. So anyway, I'm going to go ahead and begin by talking a little bit about the pattern that we're going to use. We're going to be using hopeandindustry.com, so definitely do that. I'm going to briefly put it to the cutting board, and I will be right back. And as you can see, we have our pattern from the page. Let me get back to hopeandindustry.com. This is where we're going to get our pattern for the mask that we're going to make today. So one of the cool things about this mask is it is fitted to your face. So it does have a dart. It also has ties, but you can use other things as well. So we do have about 4 minutes before we're starting, so I'm going to just quickly talk a little bit about the supplies that we would need, and of course I'll repeat this for those that are coming in a little bit later. So I'm going to switch to the cutting board. And as you can see, we have a lot of different items that we'll need. So one thing that we will want to have is, of course, our fabric. And so we will definitely want to get 100% cotton. It should be tightly woven, which is a good thing. Also, I do have my liner cut out already, just so it'll be a little bit faster. I do also have 100% cotton for the liner. Depending on what you have handy at home though, you can always use either an old sheet or an old pillowcase, or also even maybe an old t-shirt. So you can use that for the liner part because you're going to want to have something that's soft next to your face. And so we do have our cloth here. And then also we have pins and needles. And we do also have our scissors and things like that. So just to kind of quickly show you, we have chalk. We also have a bias tape maker, which you may not have one of those, and if not, that's okay too. And we have thread. We also have our measuring tape, or in this case, it's actually a small ruler that I have. And then we also have our chenille pipe cleaner, and we'll talk about how to use that in just a second. So let me go ahead and check on the time. We still have a couple of minutes. So I'd like to talk a little bit about mask making in the sense of the actual page itself. So let me go to the Hope and Industry site, and you'll see that there's a lot of good information here. I did want to mention that it does have some resources for the masks, and it talks about the materials. So this is good stuff. If you have a chance to go to this page, that would be fabulous. And let me make sure that you can see the page. Let me go to the page really quickly. So hopefully you should see the page at the moment. And again, let me backtrack a little bit so you can see where I went. So we have our masks, we have our materials. It looks like they're going to be posting some resources soon. But just to show you, in case you're just coming in, if you don't have a printed copy of the pattern that we're going to be using, when you go to hopeandindustry.com, they do have instructions and the patterns posted. They are PDF files, so they should be pretty easy to print. I'm going to be doing a large pattern today. Of course, definitely you'll want to pick the size that works for you best. And this is what it looks like. And if you notice, it does have some extra information, directions rather, on the printed page that we have. We're going to add the seam allowance, and I'll explain what that is in a moment when we get underway, which should be very, very soon. But let me stop here for just a second and check and see. It looks like it's 7 o'clock. So I'm going to go ahead and get back to the site and just really quickly introduce myself. So my name is Lauren Flores. I'm a librarian here at San Antonio Public Library, and today we're going to do a mask making workshop. So we are going to be using patterns from the Hope and Industry site, which is what I have posted on the page for you to see. I'm going to show you really quickly, and I think I just did that maybe about a minute or two ago, but I'll definitely show you how to find the pattern if you don't have one, if you'd like to quickly print one off, and also talk a little bit about the materials that you need and things like that. So I do have a printed copy of a large pattern, as I mentioned before, and let me get to that page really quickly. So if you scroll down the page, you'll see that it's got the patterns and instructions. They have the long instructions and the quick ones. So mine's a little bit modified just for ease when we install the nose wire, and we'll talk about that in a second. But these are our patterns. And again, as I said, it does have extra information, and we are going to modify it slightly because we're going to add a seam allowance. And for those that really don't do a lot of sewing, basically a seam allowance is the area between the seam, so where you would sew your stitches, and then the edge of the fabric. And so you want to make sure that there's a little bit of room when you're creating the patterns, because you don't want the pattern to be too small or too tight. And you definitely want to make sure that you have room in case the fabric itself does something, like if it frays, because these are masks that are intended to be washed every time that you use them. It's really important for safety's sake and for hygiene. And so we definitely want to make sure that these things are going to last very long, because we're going to be washing them all the time. So let me go back and quickly show you the cutting board. And I just wanted to go over again the things that you'll need for this particular thing that we're doing, mask making. So you will need at least a ½ yard of tightly woven fabric. 100% cotton is great. If you don't have 100% cotton, that's okay too. But if you don't have something that you can use, you can also substitute either a pillowcase or an old sheet. That works really well for the outer layer at least. You'll want a liner layer if your outer layer is a little bit stiff or maybe kind of rough. So I do have 100% muslin that I like to use, but of course, again, if you don't have anything handy, you can always use an old t-shirt. Those are usually very soft and not too hard to wear against your face. So the other things that you'll need is you'll need a ruler. So we are going to be measuring our seam allowance. So definitely, if you don't have a ruler of any kind, you can also use a tape measure. We have pins as well. So some folks have different methods when they cut fabric. I tend to use pins, and I also use them when I'm sewing. So you might want to have some of those handy. This is a contraption called a bias tape maker or a seam binding maker. And so not everybody has this particular device. So I will show you how to use it in a second. But of course, it's not strictly necessary. This is just something that I happen to have so I can demonstrate. So that's what that is. Of course, I have chalk because we are going to make some markings on the fabric. I have a pair of scissors, so we definitely need scissors. I also have a pencil. We're going to use that to draft our seam allowances in a moment. And then the other thing that's pretty important for this particular pattern is the chenille pipe cleaner. So we're going to make a nose wire. That's really critical for a tight fit, or I guess what they call it is a seal, basically, because you want to be sure that the air can't really get in. And so we're going to have it so that you can put it over your nose and press it down a little bit, so that way it will fit your face a little bit better. So these are our supplies. I did want to mention, of course, I have some thread. We're going to be using our sewing machine, but you can definitely do this sewing by hand. And one thing that I wanted to point out also is, before I forget, it's very handy to have an iron. You can't really see it, it's a bit off camera, but I will be using that. Generally when you're sewing, It's a good idea to have your iron nearby because you'll want to press open the seams. That'll help the garment lay better, and also it'll help it look neater. So let me jump back, and actually let me go ahead and just clear this off a little bit, because what we'll do is we'll start drafting our pattern. So let me remove some of these items. I do have a cutting board underneath, and so this is an ironing pad that I have to protect the cutting board and keeping it from melting accidentally when I use the iron. So let me fold this and get it out of the way. And here we go. So we've got our cutting board. Let me straighten it out just a tiny bit. I'm really lucky because my cutting board has a ruler built into it, so that's super helpful. We're not going to need it just yet, but we will need it when we get farther on into our process. So I'm going to take our pattern, and as I mentioned before, and hopefully you can see that okay, but as I mentioned before, we're going to be drafting the seam allowances. So let me get my ruler and my pencil, and let me see. It looks like we can see it okay, so I just want to make sure that everybody can see what I'm doing. So here we go. Oh, I see that someone is in the chat. That's so wonderful. I'm excited to make a mask too. I hope we'll have fun. I really enjoy doing this. It's so much fun as well to make a mask for a friend because people really, really appreciate it. So it's always something that I really enjoy doing. But getting back to what we were doing though, what I have is, of course, my ruler, and we have the outline of the pattern. And generally with a seam allowance, they're usually about either a 1/2 inch to 5/8 of an inch. So I usually pick a smaller seam allowance because just that's my personal preference. It's really up to you. But all I'm doing here is just going to my ruler and just marking, and I think what I'm doing here, it looks like it's about 1/2 an inch. And so I'm just going and adding that. And let's get over here. And I'll do another one. And I'm just going around because the intention is really just to, after I make my marks, just to draw all the way around for that seam allowance. So let me get to this side and work on this side. And here we go. Fabulous. And let me make this a little bit closer together just because it's a little harder sometimes to draw this freehand if they're pretty far apart. And as you can see, this is not perfectly exact. And let's go to this side. I'm going to add some more, just help me draft this a little bit better. So here we go. And again, if you are just joining us, my name is Lauren Flores. I'm a librarian here at San Antonio Public Library, and this is a mask making demonstration. And I'm almost done. I just need to make a couple more marks and then finish drawing all the way around. Let me put my ruler aside and do some of my freehand drawing here. So almost done, getting there. Okay, so, and it looks like I've got it. One thing that I wanted to point out, and let me turn it around so it's facing up and down, but we do have some parts of the pattern that we're going to want to mark. So we're going to want to transfer these marks onto the fabric after we cut it. So just to kind of quickly point it out, we have the markings for where we're going to put our ties. And so you'll see that the top strap is at a 45-degree angle. The one on the bottom is horizontal, so 90 degrees. There's also a mark, because we're not going to sew the center seam all the way to the end because we're going to have a pocket in our mask. So it's the type where it has the layers and then it's left open at the bottom, and that way you can put an extra layer. A lot of folks like to do that because it increases the efficiency of the mask to help keep the germs out. It raises their effectiveness. So definitely want to do that. And then also there's a dart. And let me explain really quickly what a dart is if you're not really familiar. When you're creating a garment, you're taking a sheet of cloth or a piece of cloth and you're draping it onto people's bodies. And of course, people's bodies are three-dimensional. For this particular mask that we're making, we're putting it over our face. So we want to make sure that it fits very closely to our face. And so this dart is going to help us shape the mask so that it fits our faces better. So let me get my scissors and I'm going to cut the pattern. And everybody has a different approach to transferring the pattern to their fabric when they're going to cut it out. Some folks like to cut out the pattern and then pin it to the fabric, which is what I do. There's other folks that like to use weights instead to weight down the pattern so they don't get holes all over the pattern. And then there's other folks that like to use a layer of tracing or marking paper. And there's actually a device that you use with that where you would put the fabric down and then the layer of the marking paper and then the pattern, and then it's a tool that looks a little bit like a pizza cutter, and you would go all the way around and it transfers the pattern to the fabric. I usually don't do anything that fancy. But I'm going to take my outer lining and cut 2 pieces because of course we're going to have 2 halves of the mask. And one thing that you'll notice is when you get the fabric, it's always a really good idea to have it with the wrong side out. And when I mean wrong side, there's usually a back side to the cloth where it's not the pretty side, and then of course you have the nice pattern and all the beautiful colors. So one of the reasons why we do that, of course, is because when we do transfer the markings, we don't really want them to be seen on the outer layer. So let me situate this so that you can see it. And so you can also do some extra stuff. I tend not to really worry about it. There's some patterns where you need to cut the pattern in a particular angle, so you might want to cut it up and down. There's some that are on the bias and those are 45-degree angle. I don't think it really matters with this particular pattern, but let me pin this down. And once we do that, I'll get my scissors. And one thing that I didn't do, and let me address that really quickly right now, is when I make darts, my tendency, and I'm going to spin the fabric around so you can see what I'm doing, but what I tend to do is just cut part of the dart and then fold it to actually do the transfer. Again, this is not necessarily the most common method that people use, but it is a method. So let me make sure that that's set up. And then let me continue with the pins. And I hope everybody is having a good time. Let me know if you have any questions, if you're following along. I love this fabric. It's Hawaiian fabric and it just makes me feel so very cheerful. And here I am cutting. And I'm trying to cut pretty close to the pattern. Sometimes maybe I'm a little bit, what's the word? Non-perfect, I suppose. Sometimes I have a little extra room, just kind of depending. But let me finish cutting this out. And we are almost done. Toss that over. Okay, so for this next part, I'm going to transfer the markings and I'm going to use chalk. So let me get my pins out of the way and set them aside. And let me grab my chalk. So what I'm doing right now is I'm going to the dart, and of course some folks will just, you know, make a line. Since I have it cut open like this, I just tend to draw on the inside. And then of course we definitely want to mark that center seam notch right here. And then I'm going to add where the bottom tie is going to go, and then I'm going to add where the upper tie is going. And so again, our markings are on the wrong side of the fabric. And I'm going to turn it over because then of course we need to repeat on the other side. So let's do that. And one more time, and let's go ahead and add those markings for the ties, and presto, we are done. So let me put our pattern aside. Normally at this point you would probably get out your lining. I was trying to make things go a little faster, so I already cut out the lining right here, but I have not sewn the lining together or sewn the darts, so that's going to be the next thing that we do. So let me take one quick precaution, because we will be using the iron in a moment, so I'm going to put down the ironing pad just to make sure that it is ready for us to use it. And then I'm going to go to the sewing machine, and let me get that set up. So here we go. So hopefully you're seeing a sewing machine, and hopefully you're also seeing the, I guess, the working area of my machine, for want of a better word. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to pin my pieces of fabric. And actually, now that I think about it, I probably should have done it over at the cutting board, but let me go ahead and I'm just going to move it over really quickly so you can see what I'm doing. So, and what I'm doing here is I'm going to reach over and grab my pins. Let me set those aside. And so I'm just starting at the end. If you notice, the dart looks a lot like a triangle. So I'm starting at the tippy top of the triangle, and then I'm going to the very bottom. And let me do the other side as well. And once we get the darts done, then we're going to sew the two halves together. So we'll have our outer lining. Let me do that. Okay, so let me do the lining as well. And hopefully everybody is having a fabulous day. I haven't been outside, but it seemed like it looked really pretty. I don't know if it's going to rain or not. So almost done. And let's see, let me finish pinning these. Okay, so we got these things pinned, and let me go ahead and get back to our sewing machine. So let me start with the outer parts, and I'm going to the sewing machine. And one thing that I wanted to point out is when you are sewing with a sewing machine, usually they have a little lever on the side. Normally when you're sewing, it goes forward. If you press a lever, it goes backwards. So one thing that you can do to increase the durability of your mask is to sew forwards a little bit, go backwards and then forwards, and then continue with your seam. And then of course when you're done with the seam, do that to finish it off. And that will help keep that seam really strong, because of course we're going to be washing these and wearing them, so we want them to last as long as possible. So let me put this down, and then I'm going to sew the edges of the darts. I'm making like an angled seam. So we're going to go forwards, backwards, we're going forwards, backwards. So that's our first dart. And let me make sure that the needle's all the way at the top. That's something new that I learned recently. So let me pull the pins out of this and we'll get to the other half. And one more time. Forward, backwards, forwards. Dart number 2. And let's see. Okay, so we've got our outer layer sorted out. I'm going to finish the 2 lining pieces and then we'll go back to the cutting board and pin them together. So we go again, one more time. There we go. And ouch, I accidentally got myself with a pin. This seems to happen every single time. So, and one last time for our darts. Oops, I almost forgot. Okay, there we go. So that way our seams are plenty strong. Awesome. Okay, so now I'm going to go to the cutting board and we're going to pin the 2 halves together for both sides. So it looks like I missed a couple of threads, so let me clip those and get those out of the way because those are messy and they get caught in things. And of course what we're going to do is we're going to put the 2 halves together. We want to be sure to have the wrong sides out. One thing I didn't mention that I will mention now is when you're sewing seams and things, you definitely want to put everything on the wrong side because that's the side that nobody's going to see. And of course we want our garments to look nice and neat. So I'm using that marking that we have for the center seam, or at least where we're going to stop our seam, just to try to line up the 2 pieces for the pattern. And let me add the pins. And just a couple more. Oh my gosh, that's so cool. Home economics. It's so funny because I took, I think, maybe 1 semester and I don't think we ever got to the sewing. So I'm glad that it reminds you of home economics. It makes me feel better. I'm sure my teacher is relieved. But let's see, let me add, and again, I'm working on the outer layer. So let me put those, and of course, pins are always unruly at times. Let me make sure. And actually, I just realized that I pinned it a little off, so let me put this to the side and repin that. So get that done. Okay, much better. So let's try this one more time. One thing that I didn't mention, and I'll take a moment, is there are ways that you can increase the durability of your mask. You can finish the ends of the fabric. So right now it's cut and there's just a raw edge. If you happen to be lucky, or if you have access to a serger, it's a machine that will actually finish the ends of the fabric for you. Let me see if I can get a close-up of that. And hopefully my close-up cam is behaving itself. It looks like it's stuck. So let me check and make sure that it's working. If not, I'll just hold it up to the camera if we can't get it to work. Which it seems like it's frozen, so I'll just go back to the cutting board and let me move it up so that you can see. But hopefully you're able to see that. But what it does basically is there's a part where it sews, and then it also has a little like razor or blade. It'll cut the end of the fabric and then it'll do an overcast stitch. This is super helpful if you have a serger, because if you're using a fabric that ravels, it will go a long way in keeping the fabric neat and just so it doesn't fall apart when you wash it. Of course, if you don't have a serger, you can use the zigzag stitch on your machine as well, or you can just leave it alone like what we're doing and just let it go. It'll stay together pretty well. There's some other fancy stuff that you can do as well, but that's really beyond the scope of what we're doing this evening. So I'm going to move right on along, and let's get back to our sewing machine. And I've got my 2 halves, or actually it's technically the lining, and it's also the outer layer. And I'm going to put them together. So let me start at the marking that we made. Actually, let's start at the top. So here we go. Well, one thing that I want to mention too is normally when you're using your sewing machine, there are little markings on what they call, like, I think it's the feed dogs or the plate over the feed dogs. And that's just to help you if you wanted to use those precise seam allowances. So it actually will show you, like, you can make 5/8 seam allowance, and you would just put the edge of the fabric against the ruler there. I usually don't use that very much. So, but I wanted to let you know that it does exist in case you want to use it. So, excuse me. So let me do my back and forth. And this is going to be interesting too. This is a curved seam, so we're going to treat it a little differently. Normally you would sew your seam. We would go to our cutting board, get our iron, and iron it. Because it is curved, we're going to do some special things to it. So I'm just telling you that so that way you'll have something to anticipate and look forward to. Oh, that's right. Yes, hem by hand. I didn't even think about that. And it looks like, I think we're going back to the previous part of the conversation where we're talking about how to finish the edges of our garments to make them more professional looking and also to make them more durable. So that's an excellent idea. I'll have to do that. Let me go back. And get that. And one thing I definitely do not want to forget, because when I make these for myself, I tend to forget this particular part that I'm about to show you. But one thing is, these masks, of course, have a pocket in them, so you do leave the bottom part open. And I found that it's much easier to add a hem at the bottom. And let me move over to the cutting board so you can see what I'm talking about. But, you know, we have the seam. This part is open, and it is a raw edge, and it will fray if we don't do something to it. So I'm going to make a quick rolled hem, and of course I'm going to fold it so that way it's invisible. So it's folded towards the wrong side. So let me get back to our sewing machine and get that set up. And again, you can do this at any point. I've just found that it seems like it's a little bit easier to sew that particular hem at this point, because otherwise it gets a little bit tricky. And if not tricky, then it's kind of a pain. But so I've got that first half done, and let me do the other side. So let me make another rolled hem. And one thing I did forget, and hopefully y'all will remind me, but I did forget to do the front and back reinforcement, so please remind me if I overlook that. That does happen occasionally. Okay, there we go. So that is our outside layer, so we are definitely accomplished. This is great. So I'm going to set it aside on the cutting board, and we will address it in a moment. So next we're going to take our lining and do the same thing. And this time I will remember to do the forward backwards. Okay, there we go. So we've got our hem, well, not hem, rather seam, excuse me. Okay, let me pull out the pins, and we will also do our little rolled hem at the open ends just to finish those. So let me get that set up. And here we go. I'm going to check and see. Hello everybody in chat. I'm so happy that you're here. I hope you're having a good time. Okay, so let me get the second part and then we'll be ready for the next step. And here we go. Okay, so almost there. Ooh, make sure that that is, there we go, got it. Okay, so we've got our lining done. So I'm going to toss that onto the cutting board. Let's go over there and we will do our next steps. And so one thing that I'm definitely going to do is make sure that all these little hanging threads are addressed, because they do drive me crazy and it seems like they get caught in things. So let me make sure that that is sorted out. And then, because this particular seam is curved, we have to do a couple of things to it to make it sit right. I'm going to get these last two bits. But one of the things with a curved seam is when we press it, it can get bunched up and it's going to look a little weird anyway. So we're going to use a special tool in a second. But the first thing that you should do is take your scissors, and we're going to cut small notches, so it's called clipping the seam. And we'll do that at intervals of about 1 inch or so. And we definitely do not want to cut all the way to the seam because that would be counterproductive, of course. So we've got our lining now, and I'll see if I can bring it a little bit closer so you can see what I'm doing a little bit better. I think this one's a good one because you can see the contrast with the thread and the fabric. So we've got that done. And as I mentioned before, since it's curved, it's going to be a little peculiar when we try to iron it. Normally when you're ironing a seam, you would put the garment inside out and then you take the two sides of the seam and you push them down and you press them flat. Let me get that so you can see what I'm doing. So normally we would do that. If it was flat, it would be pretty easy just to put it on the ironing board and voila. But since it's curved, I do have a special tool. It's called a tailor's ham. And if you don't have one, you can just get a pillow and drape the mask on the pillow. One of my relatives describes this as a cloth anvil, and I think that's a really apt description because it's a very firm pillow. It's not soft at all. And it's really just a surface that you can drape the mask over, especially the curved surfaces, and then have a place where you can use the iron. So as you can see, I'm draping the mask on the ham. And I normally press down just a little bit because I don't like to burn my fingers when I'm doing this. And I will mention, if y'all are interested, I made this ham myself. Like, you can definitely buy one at Joann or any other craft store. They usually have them, or you can buy it on Amazon. But I did download a pattern and I made this with some waste fabric that I had. And I made it in about 20 minutes. So it's a really easy project if you'd like to do that. But let me balance the ham. And I'm getting my iron now. And I'm gonna iron this. And I might reposition this on the ham. Let me get the other side. There's usually an art to it. Let me make sure that you can see what I'm doing. I'm very thankful to have this particular tool though, because it is a bit difficult. Oh, thank you so much. I'm so glad. Thank you for the compliment. I'm looking forward to wearing it. Though actually, technically, this is for one of my friends, so I'm hoping that they will enjoy wearing it too. Let me get the other parts of this hem. And let's do some some pressing down with our fingers, and then we'll use our iron. And let me make sure that the iron is on. Yep, it is on. So let me set that down. It might take the iron a moment or two to get to peak warmth, but before I forget, I realized that I moved the mask a little early, but we do also want to press down those darts. And so for this particular pattern, you want to press them downwards towards your jawline. So there we go. We've got that, and I'm going to turn it over and we will do some more pressing with our lovely Tailor's ham. And then one thing that I tend to do, and I think it's generally something that you do when you're sewing, is you press seams from the inside out and then you'll turn it right side out, excuse me, and then press one more time, and that just helps it look nice and neat. So let me drape this again, and actually, let me see. I use different parts of the ham for different parts of these curved seams. So it looks like that one is doing pretty good. So let's iron that. And then let me set my iron down. And let me drape it again on the ham. Smooth that out a little bit. And here we go. Fabulous. And then I will set this down, and it looks like I accidentally put a wrinkle on it, so I'm glad that I'm going over this one more time to remove that wrinkle. And let's see, there we go. So we have our outside layer. I'm going to put that aside in the corner, and then I will do the same thing with the lining, and I might, let me do it this way. I did pre-wash both sets of fabric, which is one important step. Of course, if you're using a well-washed t-shirt and a well-washed old sheet or a pillowcase, you might not have to necessarily wash it if it's clean. But generally, if you are using fabric that you've bought new, it's a really good idea to pre-wash it, so that way it'll shrink if it's going to shrink and all that good stuff. So let me drape this once more onto the ham. Here we go. Okay, so let me add this really quickly. Okay, here we go. And that's quite shiny and bright. So we've got that part done. Let me move to this next part. I'll get that done. So there we go, and then let me press our darts. Well, actually I did that already, so we can skip that part. Let me turn it inside out and be sure to get that all nice and pretty looking. So let's see, one more time. And there we go. So I'm going to set this down and remove the ham, because the next thing that we're going to do is we're going to cut the ties. And as I mentioned before, you can use elastic instead. It seems like it goes a lot faster if you have access to that. I wasn't able to get any because it seems like it's all sold out, but I was able to get this one 100% cotton. It's like twill tape, and they use it sometimes for drawstrings and things like that. So this seems to work pretty well. I ended up buying this online, so you can definitely use that. And there's a lot of other ingenious ways that people have come up with keeping the mask on your face. So if you see any and want to pass along any tips, I would love to hear any tips and tricks that you do for that. But if you're going to make ties, of course, and let me remove our ironing pad, what you can do is you can just take the extra fabric that you have left over, and I'm usually very, I don't want to say blasé, but I'm not terribly precise with this part. Of course, you can be as precise as you want to be, but what I usually do is I usually find a nice end that seems to be pretty ample and pretty straight. And then since I do have this ruler on my cutting board, I just measure out. Let me turn it around. I usually do it this way. I usually take it and make a mark every 1.5 inches. Do that. So that's 1, 2. This would be 3. And this would be 4. And again, since I'm not terribly precise, I usually fold, make several different folds. So that way I can just cut it all at once, and so it doesn't have to be like a really long cut. And then I just cut strips. So let me do that really quickly. And if you look at the directions that come with the pattern, they do recommend that each tie should be 16 inches. So let me finish cutting my strips. Put this aside. And then of course you can go to your measuring tape and just measure out 16 inches and then cut that out, and then you're done. So let me put these aside because I do have some ties that I made already just to make things go faster, because it looks like we are getting towards the end of our hour, and I definitely want to have us a mask made by the end of the hour. But just to kind of show you what I've done here is I have taken the strips and you can fold them. Let me grab one that is not made because I did want to make one with you. Let me find it really quickly. Hopefully I did not misplace it. If not, I will just use one of the strips that I have, of course, so they just cut out. So we can definitely do that. Let's see if I put it aside. It may be hiding under the ham, actually. That would be pretty funny. Let me just get one. Actually, oh, here it is. Okay, I found it. This is great. So one way that you can deal with this, of course, is if you don't have any fancy contraptions, you can just fold over the raw end and then make a small fold just on the edge, and then fold the edge. And this is basically just to bind up or finish the raw edges. And of course you can always use the iron to iron this, and then you can fold it in half and then sew it. I also mentioned my lovely little machine, which I haven't really used it very much, so this should be fun. I'm kind of curious to see how well it works. But generally what you do is you take the wide end and you thread through the strip that you made of fabric, and then you pull it all the way out. And I've seen some people that use a special tool. I'm just going to use a pin to pull it out. Let's see, there we go, almost there. Ah, there we go. So here's the end, and what it does is it will come out the narrow side and it does fold the ends. And so you can take your iron and then just use your little machine and just keep going forward and making. And it looks like it did come out perfectly, but I think you get the idea. So I'm just going to do this the way I usually do it, which is by hand, even though I have a nice little section that we started that looks nice and neat. So I'm going to fold this up. And I will often bind one end, and that'll be, of course, the end of the tie that you see on the outside, and then I usually leave the other end raw, even though it is bound on the sides, on both sides. You'll see what I mean in a moment. But just because the end of the tie is going to be in between the two layers, and so it probably won't fray too badly. But let's get to the sewing machine and let me do this last tie, and then we'll actually start attaching the ties to the mask, and we are almost there. So let me do this one really quickly. And again, I'm really just doing this by hand. I made the little fold with the two edges folded under, and then I'm just folding it as I go. Let me fix something. There's like a little, there we go. We had a little wrinkle. Awesome. Oh, cool. Great trick. Thank you. Yeah, this is so much fun because there's so many people. I mean, I've been sewing for about 20 years, but I never really was taught formally. And there's so many cool people, especially when you go onto YouTube and you look things up. There's all these really cool people that have these amazing sewing skills, and I enjoy it very much to just go onto YouTube and learn sometimes. It's definitely pretty cool. So let me get to, whoop, and I'm sewing pretty fast. That was just my phone, so please excuse me. Okay, so, and I'm sewing a little bit fast because I do want to make sure that we get to the end of our workshop with our mask all done. So, whoops, let me do some adjustments. Hang on a second. Almost there. Because we definitely want to get this part done, because the very last thing that we're going to do once we put on the ties and then sew the two layers together is we're going to install our little nose wire. So let me get this done. There you go. Okay, so we are going to jump back to the cutting board just very, very briefly so we can add the ties. And I have to admit, when I first made this pattern, I was a little confused at this part because I wasn't really expecting them to be installed in this particular manner. Not that it's horribly complicated, it's just something that I wasn't used to. But what you do is you take the outside layer and you make sure that the good side is facing up, and we're going to attach the ties onto the good side, and they're facing inwards, so that way when we add the lining and we turn it over and then iron it, then they'll be bound within the seam. Oh, thank you. I'm glad that, thank you for the compliment with the way that I cut the strips. Sometimes I wonder if I'm being a little too lazy, but thank you so much. I do appreciate that. And let me attach that. It looks like the markings that we made earlier have rubbed off a little bit, but I've done this so many times that I kind of have it semi-memorized, so I guess that's okay. And let me make sure that I'm using the right end for this. And again, the top ones will be at a 45-degree angle, and the bottom ties are going to be at a 90-degree angle. So let me make sure that I'm attaching the right side, because I'm going to use that unfinished side. So here we go. And then we're going to attach these with a sewing machine. And for this one, you definitely want to remember to use that back and forth trick, because there will be a bit of stress with the ties when you're tying them around your head. So we want to make sure that everything stays in place. So let me do this, and it doesn't really take that long. So I'm doing several back and forths. And let me make sure that these are nice and neater looking. And here we go with the next one. And it looks like we're doing okay with time. It should be just a moment more before we get our ties done, and then we're going to pin the 2 layers together and sew that, and that doesn't take very long. So one more time. And this is our last one. Knock on wood. Make sure. Awesome. Okay. So let's stop by the cutting board so that we can pin the 2 sides together. And this part, of course, is always interesting as well, because since we have our ties facing inside, we want to make sure that they're not caught in the seam. So let me, oh, and I missed a thread. Let me get that thread out of the way. Sometimes I like bunch them up in a little ball and put them in the middle, but that's also maybe a little iffy. So let me just carefully pin. And for this part, we do want to be sure to use the wrong sides out. It's so frustrating when you're in the middle of something and you think you're almost done, and then you realize that you've sewn it the wrong way. It drives me crazy. So we will definitely go out of our way to prevent that this evening. So, and I'm going and just pinning these together. And we probably do need our fabric anvil, so I'll get that in a moment. We need that shortly. And I'm pinning, of course, the darts, and then I'm just pinning the ends over here. So let's get this one more time and pin this together. And then we just need 2 more pins and we are ready to go. Let me make sure that it's all nicely folded in there. So one thing that I didn't do, and I wanted to mention, if you are following the pattern exactly, you'll notice when we go back to the pattern itself, it does show that you can cut the liner a little bit smaller. I normally don't do that because I'm usually in a hurry, but you are of course welcome. That's the recommended method, of course. But now we're going to sew all the way around, and then we're going to get our ham and iron this, and we will have a mask. So this is pretty exciting. I'm very excited with the anticipation. So I got one side done. And we're doing the top part. Oops, excuse me. Sometimes I do get in a hurry. So we're turning the corner and we are almost done. So there we go, and let me do some thread clipping and remove some of our pins, and then we'll go to the cutting board and we'll get our tailor's hem and start ironing. So let me get those pins out. And so let's turn this thing inside out. And we've got a mask. So let me pull this out. What I usually end up doing is taking the ham and draping it over the ham once more, and just using the ham to pull the ties and make sure that everything is all where it should be. So let me iron that. It looks like we have some little bits that we can go back and clip in a moment. It looks like maybe the bottom is a little uneven, so if it does bother you, we can always go back and fix that as well. It may not be terribly visible because it is going to be under your neck, but just in case. So there we go. And then let me get this little end. And hopefully you can see it's pointed, so I'm going to make sure that we've got it all nice and neat and folded out. And let me drape this again, and I'll iron on the side. So the hem does really come in handy. So let me set my iron aside, and then of course the moment of truth. So let me get back to our main camera. And of course I can never resist. I usually take the mask and put it over my face. Ta-da, I'll show it off. So with the time remaining, it looks like we have 3 minutes. I'm just gonna describe what we're doing. If you have any questions, just let me know. But basically, to install the nose part, or the nose wire rather, and actually let me get up and switch to the cutting board really quickly. So let me just demonstrate how you do that. And it looks like we have about 3 minutes to go, or maybe 5, but you would get your length of chenille pipe cleaner and measure it out. Since this is a large, you'd want to cut it either 4 inches or 4.5 inches. And let me fold this back. And I normally just bend it in half, that way I can tell where it is, so I can center it better in the inside of the mask. But then I go into the mask itself, and we have that seam that we made, and I just put it in the seam. And so for this part, the pipe cleaners, they're a little fuzzy, and sometimes they move around when you're sewing them. And if you follow the directions on the website, it's hard to get them to stay in place if you're following their method. And so I use this method instead because it seems to work a little bit better. But what I'm doing right now is I'm just putting the pipe cleaner inside that seam, and then I'm trying to catch the metal part or the wires with my pen just to make sure that it stays in place. So let me make sure that that is pinned. And then all we'll do after this is we're going to go back to our sewing machine, and we will sew a casing around the wire, and then we'll be done. So let me make sure that this last part is pinned so that it gets installed correctly. And we are almost done. So let's get back to the last part. And for this part, let's see if you can see holding it up, but we have of course the middle seam. So what we're going to do is we're going to sew a vertical seam where the edge of the wire is on one side, and then we'll do another horizontal seam, and then we'll do another vertical one, and that will make the casing. Oh, thank you so much. Thank you all so much for coming to the workshop. I hope you had a good time, and I had so much fun. So if you're interested, there should be, of course, a recording of this, so you can go back and watch it if you'd like. Let me quickly add the casing just so that I can try it on one more time. Okay. I'm sewing over the top. There we go. And so now we have our mask. So again, thank you so much for watching. If y'all have any questions, people that are listening or watching, go ahead, and you can always go to the library's website. It's at mysapple.org. You can also call Monday through Friday from 9 to 5. You can call 210-207-2500 if you have any questions. And of course, we do also have an online Ask a Librarian service, so you can ask questions there. I hope y'all had a wonderful time. I really enjoyed being here today, making a mask with you all. And I hope to see y'all soon. Y'all have a wonderful evening. Goodbye, everybody. And our stream is ended.